All right, here with Kevin Schofield of SCC Insights, that's Seattle City Council Insights. And for us to follow you on Twitter, like you are the one who breaks everything down bit by bit in like regular layman's terms and everything else. Big news night here in Seattle, and I'm glad you're up here late with me. Please tell everybody, what's happened tonight over in the federal court.
Yeah, so there's been this big argument over the last week about what to do with the ordinance that the city council passed last month, back in June, that banned a lot of the crowd control weapons. And they moved really fast to do it when they passed it in the middle of June. And unfortunately, they kind of bypassed something that was supposed to happen under a consent decree, which is new changes to SPD's policies like use of force or crowd control are supposed to go through this process where the Department of Justice and the court review them and approve them, so that everybody can make sure that it makes sense to everybody. And that comes from the pre-2012 pre-consent decree world, where there weren't those policies for a lot of things, right? So there weren't rules for them. So they said, okay, we want you to have rules, and we want to review them, and we want to improve them to make sure that they're the right rules. And then you can't go change them on your own, right? If you want any changes, you got to come back and tell us, and we got to make sure that they're okay, right? And so, the fight that there's been between SPD and the city council over the last month has been over city council just going on their own and changing these rules, right? Saying you can't use all these crowd control weapons. And the context from the point of view of the Department of Justice around this has been, hey, we wrote a bunch of those rules for use of force and crowd control so that we knew what the options were that we really wanted police to do that were less than shooting people, right? And so we want to make sure they had the right tools, you make sure they had the right options, the right training, all that stuff. And so, what first SPD said, and then what happened earlier this evening is the Department of Justice said, hey, we're really pretty upset because the city council just banned almost all the tools other than basically sticks and tasers that SPD can use for doing something other than either walking away or shooting people. And we really liked having options. Now, they may not be the right options. And, but the SPD and the mayor and the judge, Judge Robart, who oversees the whole consent decree, have all said, hey, we want to hear from the Office of Police Accountability and the Office of Inspector General and the Community Police Commission about their thoughts on all this. And they had all said, yeah, we want to give you our thoughts, but we just need a little bit more time to get that together before we give you something. And so while that, all that was going on, the problem is that this ordinance, the crowd control ban, weapons ban that this city council passed, goes into effect tonight.
Right.
And so the Department of Justice, and it puts the police in a really awkward situation because, they have a no-win scenario, right? Either they violate the ordinance that the city council just passed, or they violate the consent decree by not following the officially court-approved policies, right?
So the official court-approved policy is that they can use the less than lethal.
There was a set of them, and it's in real detail. It says exactly under what circumstances they can use them. It says what training they have to get before they can use them. So there's a whole set of rules that go with it. It isn't just like, hey, here's a list, go for it with these things. It's like really detailed about all that stuff and how it can be used.
It sounds like what happened in court today, isn't it just as simple as the city bans tear gas and the DOJ sues to allow tear gas. It sounds like what happened today was the DOJ saying that the city council has to abide by the consent decree. And in doing so, they put this restraining order that allows the Seattle Police Department to operate under the decree rules as opposed to the ordinance that the city council has put forth.
Yeah, so actually what the judge said he's going to do, and his written ruling should come out later tonight, was you may remember Judge Richard Jones back in early June had a case in front of him which was filed by Black Lives Matter, Seattle King County, that was specifically trying to stop some of these same things, some of the same things that the city council's ordinance was going after, right? And the judge put a temporary restraining order in place around that said, except in, very specific circumstances, he said, I disapprove of the conduct of the police. And so except within very specific circumstances, the police can't use a bunch of these things, right? And, and he was very precise. So what the judge tonight, a different judge, Judge Robart, said tonight was, I'm going to put an injunction in place and stop the city council's ordinance from going into effect. And I'm going to roll everything back to what Judge Jones said. So his temporary restraining order from June 12th is going to be the law now.
In that restraining order, it said that I think some of my footage, the pink umbrella footage, was in that.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And that footage is everywhere now. But my understanding is that what Judge Jones said is that less than lethal or tear gas could only be used when an officer felt that his life was in danger. It was a set of criteria. So it still wasn't banned under that court order with the injunction with the ACLU. It was more restricted.
Yeah, and it's not just tear gas we're talking about here. We're also talking about blast balls. We're talking about, they have these kinds of sort of projectile pepper spray things where they can toss it out there and opens up and creates a cloud. It's kind of like tear. Yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with it.
I'm familiar with all.
So so Judge Jones said that whole set of things, you can only use them in these very specific circumstances. What the city council said was it basically banned all of them, and including, and they were really kind of rough in the language that they use. So they said, not only can't you use sort of the tear gas light, I'm sorry to use that phrase, but pepper spray kind of thing where it creates a cloud out there, but police can't even use like the handheld pepper spray where they spray somebody directly unless they can be assured that it will not sort of splash on anybody else, right? So it was very, very broad bans they put in place. And it may or may not be the right thing to do, right? And all the judge said today and all the DOJ is really saying is we need to take the time and hear from the OPA and the OIG and CPC and make sure we really get that policy right and get our subject matter experts to weigh in on this and tell us what the right policy is so that police do have an option somewhere in between shooting people and just walking away. But we know they're trained for it. We know what tools they're going to use. We know what circumstances they're going to use it in.
Right. And so why did the DOJ literally wait to the 24th hour to be able to go and take this to court when the city council passed this ordinance almost a month ago?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the lawyer for the CPC was asking that question in the hearing this evening today. He's like, they waited a long time to do this, and they didn't, raise issues when, the Black Lives Matter case was coming on. They didn't raise issues as all these individual incidents have happened along the way, but now they're raising it now. That's a really, really good issue, and they didn't really have a great answer for it.
I know you're a policy wonk, so I don't want to put you too deep into the political arena, but I mean, do you think that the current turn of events and things that are going on in like Portland and the DHS agents arriving here in Seattle have to do with the timing, as well as like, you had the president of the SPOG saying, hey, we want, do you think there's a political dynamic that came into play with DOJ waiting literally to the last minute to file this, or they were just like, we're just going to file it right now?
So there's clearly a political element to this for the DOJ. I think it's less sort of the immediate thing right now because, this, as soon as Trump went into office, he and his Department of Justice were saying, we're going to de-emphasize all the consent decree kind of cracking down on local police, right? So this has been 3 years in the making. And in fact, the first hearing of, the Trump administration DOJ for the consent decree that he held after Trump took over, he really quizzed the DOJ on that. He's like, okay, I'm hearing the stuff in the press that you guys are backing away on these sorts of things. Are you going to continue pressing hard on this consent decree for Seattle police? Are you going to let up? And he really put them on the spot, and they had to say, no, we still believe in this. We're still going to move forward. But, it sure does look like over the last couple of years, they've really eased up. That, SPD and DOJ have been on the same page for a lot of stuff. And, part of that, I'll give some credit to SPD for this, right? They have really worked hard on a lot of policies. And if you look at kind of a lot of the metrics around use of force, the amount of use of force from SPD has gone way down over the last 8 years. It's a tiny fraction of what it was. There's still a lot of issues because in terms of who they're using it on, there's still big racial disparities in that, right? It's still being used a lot more on Black people and on people of color, right? And they've got a lot more work to do, and they're trying to figure out what that's about, and they're not having a lot of success in being able to articulate why there's still those racial disparities in that. But there have been a lot of places where they have made some progress on it, right? So they've got a ton of work still to do, and they mostly say that too. They're definitely not there yet, but just, you know, on a lot of the stuff that, you know, I think when I step back and look at it, I think the DOJ really has been easier on SPD the last couple of years. And they just tend to get an agreement really quick. When you look at, you know, the police accountability legislation, you look at stuff around the SPOG contract. The DOJ didn't really push back on the SPOG contract at all. They could have, like the CPC would, but they really didn't.
Right. Tomorrow, you know, if it gets funky, you know,
tonight,
even tonight here. If it gets funky, does that mean that, you know, if a situation fits the criteria of Judge Jones' order around the original TRO, it's filed by the ACLU last month?
Yep.
That's a mouthful. Does that mean that we very well could see tear gas and other less than lethal munitions used?
We very well could, yeah. And I'm hoping that it all gets documented and we get lots of great video footage so we can hold all those cops accountable. And I hope they do the right thing, right?
All right. Well, look, man, thanks for checking in and, you know, breaking everything down. You know, I appreciate it. I know it's late in the evening, but there were so many questions that are out there in the Twitterverse, and I thought that you know, you would be a good person to be able to explain the court ruling to our audience. So thank you.
I'm always happy to help. I'm always happy to help talk to folks. And you know, this policy stuff is really, really hard. And you know, I think we all want fast change on all of these issues. We all really, you know, we're all impatient. I mean, people's lives are at stake here, and it's challenging and you know, tough to be asked to be patient when people's lives are at stake, right? But sometimes, you know, we get in these kinds of conflicts where trying to figure out what we should change it to is hard. And it's just hard for us to wait for this.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Have a wonderful evening. We're going to, man, make sure that we can, you'll keep us updated in the progress of the court.
Anytime. Thanks, man.
Peace.